Oh no, it's you again. Let's see who comes in. It is kind of difficult to try to have some consistency in this when people have such different timing opportunities to come in. Like I think Brendel will have problems coming in the morning in a couple of weeks. Oh no, Alan actually. I was thinking, yeah. Yeah, where's Alan kind of?
Hello, sorry, I couldn't, had to hit the record, accept acknowledgement before I could unmute. It's funny.
Right. Oh yeah, I'll pause for a bit actually and not.
Rehash. So, okay, great. So I was thinking about why I hadn't read the email exchanges or any of your emails, sadly. I mean, I'll read some of them and I'll read them in skim, but what's my hesitation? Oh, there's so many hands up with reading. And it made me think of Dorian Taylor's article, Agile as Trauma. And it made me think that actually in some ways reading is kind of like trauma, or could be framed that way. When you ask someone to read something that you wrote, and sometimes you're asking them to put more effort in than you put into writing it. And this is where I think something like Slack or async channels become really valuable. And maybe it hasn't been expressed this way, but that mode is understood to be conversation rather than writing, right? So when you're talking in async channels, it's like, just go for what is being, imagine it's coming out of my mouth. But in email format, it feels like, hey, here's the thing, and the manifesto perhaps specifically, here's a thing that has been composed. Now I must deconstruct my thoughts on it as well as what's been represented. There's just a whole lot going on there to unspoken request. So guessing maybe what all Adam was saying there is just like, or what I think I should say is these things might be better suited to be worked out in a more conversational channel, like the one we have right now, or something that's async, and then can lead to something that you can ask other people to read and reflect on, right? But yeah, that's what I wanted to share there. I think that's also why I haven't read so much of the material that's come out of this group, the book. And it's a thing to think about. And perhaps some of my devil's advocacy when it comes to the speaker series is that I'm working my way through Barbara Tversky's book, and I adore it, but I still put it down at times and let it kind of, the concept sink in, and I'll pick it back up in a month or two. I'm not going to read a full transcript of what these talks are about. And I know that's not the point. The point is to have something in the archives. But those are the issues I want to bring.
Okay, I see
what
many
came to mind.
I see many hands, but this is really important. First, a detail. Are you happy with the invitation email? Yeah. Okay.
Where's that?
I think I invited you. I'm not sure. I should have. And the other point is, hang on. Let's just actually, Peter, please go ahead.
Okay. I wanted to note just slightly before when Alan was talking that his comment about thinking about ways that we can be more effectively developing code together and not email really resonated with me. And I also want to note that I've been thinking about responding to your email vis-a-vis the legal issues, but it didn't seem to me that email was the right forum. And I want to be somewhere between the formality of a formal journal piece and the informality of an email piece. And I'm still not sure exactly how to balance that, but the response should probably come as an author document with its own little visual meta attached so that it could get slotted into the journal at a later point. With respect to law, a key consideration is that ownership isn't an all or nothing thing. The greatest invention in the area of intellectual property was the notion of being able to break up and fragment rights along a bunch of different dimensions so that you can have distinct rights for reproduction in different media. You can have separate rights for building follow-on derivative works, and you can parcel out those packages of rights and subdivide them and sell them off in different chunks, either exclusively or non-exclusively. So there's so much that you can do once you realize that you're not dealing with a single atomic right, but really a spectrum of options. And that's why I find the Creative Commons licensing approach to be particularly appealing, because it does break out those different right elements as opposed to the monolithic licenses that are used in the open source community.
Interesting. On the invitation, you're all okay with that invitation? Because then I'll just send it. I should have sent it last week, but 1, 2, 3.
Yeah,
Where's
I
the
think
invitation?
for those who've not seen it, I don't think there's anything controversial. It is just basically the invite will go to people asking to come to Barbara's.
Sure, okay, yeah, fire away.
Okay,
So,
good. Brendel is here. Good to see you. Relevant things. Mark has something, and then I
yeah,
have
just a couple of quick
something,
things.
and then we can go
I
silent.
will throw in just I was thinking another factor that I mentioned to Fred, which is entirely due to our sort of global settings, and quite apart from our time zones, is the fact that, especially at the end of the week, if we do something and sort of send something out after it, that's the beginning of the weekend, which means different things to different people. But what that may effectively mean is that it's going to get answered on Monday earliest, and possibly on Monday in a different time zone earliest. And that's really difficult when you're on the sending end, because you sent it with the thought that people go, yes, really, and but it's reality. And I mean, that's just something I'm reminding myself as much as anyone that you know that sort of something gets lost in the thing. And I think I put up the article. Sorry, I put that back in for Brendel. Alan mentioned a guy called Dorian Taylor.
Yeah, that was the correct one.
It wasn't.
Did I throw the link into the 4-channel approach that I liked? It looks like I skipped that.
Sorry, was that the wrong one that I put in?
No, you're right.
No,
You're right.
I loved it, I think I aimed it. I sort of, my eyes fell on the thing with collaboration is yet more trauma, and I thought, yeah, hey. But one thing I just sort of, by way of partial summary of something that Fred and I kicked backwards and forwards, is I was trying to work out how to sort of slot in the things that we can practically do into the umbrella of the sort of higher level aim that we have. I think I'm probably of the camp that though I think we are effectively making manifesto, I know that word is sort of potentially toxic, and also it may also sometimes apply a bit more involvement than is meant. So, but I think we've crested that rise, so we'll leave that alone. But I was having it's an interesting sort of chicken egg argument with Fred about the fact that so we're talking about how we exchange. In order to own something and move it across, you need to have a something. And the perspective I was coming from were different. That I was sort of thinking, oh well, okay, do we actually know how these things are defined? Which sort of means in terms of their data / format in a fairly loose way, because I'm assuming at the moment that pretty much every big player in the field is probably doing it differently, just because no one told them they had to do it a certain way, and they all have their slightly different names. But that's one of the things that will constrain effectively the implicit meta format or sort of VR meta, like the visual meta we did for text kind of thing, that I think we're working towards, because to a certain extent that's where it hits reality. If the thing I've defined you can't understand, then no one owns anything because it's not going. And that might sound flippant. I don't mean it that way. It doesn't. But I also totally accept it doesn't mean the opposite, which, as it may appear, that the data is the only thing that matters. I was just thinking about it's this subtle interplay between the tools and the data, which got me thinking about, well, as well as exploring the some of the environments which Fred's been getting into, and actually shared one with me earlier, which is really interesting, was, well, what sort of data, to wit, textual data, because we are the future of text, can we and should we be playing around with to expose some of these edges? And it comes to me naturally, because I think that's one thing I'm quite happy doing, is sort of digging up globs of information and getting them into a standard. My sort of, I suppose my task to myself is that I want to give something that they can use without it breaking everything, which is not much data as you come to it in the first place. So one of the useful things I can do here, I may not be able to do anything with the data myself, but hopefully I can give something they can play with. So, to wit, today I found an amazing database. Basically, it was compiled to stop people desecrating war graves, but it's every naval ship that's been sunk since, I think, 1500 up to the current day. So massive time span. Really, you can imagine around about 1940 somewhere, it gets a bit heavy, and there'll be lots of events, and it's all in locations. So there are, reasons things. So we've got temporal stuff, we've got Latin long, and we've got other things. And I thought that might be interesting to explore. And also, it's sufficiently so far from what any of us do that it gets us out of worrying about whether, the point is not, do I understand it? But when I look at this, can I make sense? And it sort of speaks to me as exactly the kind of thing that I imagine that VR might offer us something to do. Otherwise, I can look at a table that comes out of a spreadsheet. I might be able to make a graph, and if I'm really lucky, I might be able to make an interactive graph. And and then I'll shut up. The other thing that came to me from that is that this, to me, now speaks really strongly of something that Fred's spoken eloquently of in the past, which is sort of living documents. The data might not be in the document, maybe the data might be referenced from the document, but in a sense, so I might find, oh, look, I can look at the data underneath this, and I can look at it in all these ways. And so part of that from me, for instance, crime data is, well, is what's there enough? Are there other things that are needed? If I want to play with a table, an Excel spreadsheet in 3D, are there more things that are actually needed or not? And I don't know. And again, so I just thought that that's another thing that we could usefully do. And I willingly offer myself up to sort of do some slave work on the data for that. I'll give it over to Fred.
Okay, so earlier Alan was saying the long emails or the articles, why should he read it? I'm paraphrasing you, Alan, because I think that is actually a central issue of text, right? If you are talking about Wittgenstein or somebody famous and an authority, yes, you should invest the time and effort. But if you're talking about a colleague, why in the world should you do that? I think that's really, really important. I just submitted my thesis, which is, many words and all of that. It's a ridiculous document. It is intended only to show other people that I can do stuff, right? If I was going to make that useful, I would have to make it in many smaller bits and make it more hyperlinked and all of that stuff. So that is why, I don't know, Brendel, did you see the email that Adam replied to me this weekend?
Yes, and I read the parts of the manifesto, but it has disappeared at such point as I had managed to get the time together to read the whole thing. But yes, I saw the thread, and I read everything in the thread.
I'm going to go off recording for a bit, so we can discuss how kind of our workings in private. So that was a bit of housekeeping, and now we're back on. Alan wanted to talk about how he sees, as you started, a good rhythm for us to move forward.
Oh, yes, sure. And but does anybody else? There's been some hands up and that have gone down.
It's it doesn't need to be sequential. You crack on and pick up the earlier point, and then we'll pick up the rhythm.
All right. Thank you, Mark. You're a gentleman and a scholar, or one or the other. in whatever order. Yeah, I was thinking about the nature of our conversations, the difficulty it is. That's understandable to sort of pinpoint what it is that we're about. And so an orthogonal approach to that might be to elect kind of mascots or rallying points that we can say, yes, this is one thing that we really love. We identify with this. We want more of this. And so in that vein, like for instance, the book Creative Selection with Ken, I can't remember his last name.
Cosienda.
Cosienda, thank you. It evokes a lot of, I think the feeling of the group, the idea of the value of quick demos, quick impact, and that you can't solve all of the problems all at once. So you actually, I even think it'd be worth going through, and I've been highlighting parts of it that are like, hey, here's a lesson, here's a separate lesson. So we could spend more time discussing what goes into a demo, as well as so the meta of a demo, as well as coming up with stories and what good things would be to either crystal ball or truly build. And the final point about that was on the other side, on the other end of the spectrum, there's the VR, which in my mind, and I mentioned this in the email, to me, VR and climate change are like, they're so close together in my head, which I know sounds absurd, but they're both inevitable. They're intertwined. We don't know what direction they're going to go. We don't know how it's going to land, but we know it's going to happen. And so it limits a lot of what we can do. Like we can't say, I think climate change is going to do this, and therefore we need to do this. It's very, like I feel helpless when it comes, I'm sure we all do, when it comes to climate change. What we can do is talk about it, come up with different ways to break it down. Yeah, that's
okay.
it.
Sorry, Mark and Peter, I just have to jump in there. Two of my closest friends, one was Doug, one is Vince, right? And this is not me saying, oh, brag. I was very lucky to get to know Doug and hence Vince. They could not have afforded to think like that, right? When the internet happened, there was a bunch of students making it. They were always expecting the adults in the room. They never appeared, right? Doug always talked about himself as this farm boy from Oregon. There's going to be a lot of stuff with Apple and Oculus and all these fancy things, or Meta, fair enough. But we have an absolute obligation to do this, because don't forget that the only people who will do stuff is people. We are people, right? It isn't out of our control. Of course, we have almost no say in this at all. But if we look at jumping 5 years ahead and looking back, we could have a really good discussion of what we should have done. And what we should have done, we all agree in this group. We need to write statements to clarify and inspire. So, by the way, Brandel, this is a new version of the article. Please read it. And I would love for you to contribute pieces of specific, we need to do this. That would be amazing. And also, yes, we need to do demos. We need to, at this point, I think it's 50-50 demo and politics. The politics of it is to inspire and warn and get lots of famous people to say, holy moly, VR is going to take over our lives. We all need to do blah, blah, blah. And the blah, blah, blah is the kind of dialogue we're holding up. That's all. I hope you're not too offended by me saying, Alan, I think we have more power.
No. I love that. And I have something to add to that, but I'll throw it in chat. Everybody else, go ahead.
Yeah, Mark, sorry. And then Peter, sorry, guys.
Oh, okay. Yes, take to writing things down, because of course we loop around nicely. I was going to say, I think about the journal, and I mean, something that's always, I was never lucky enough to meet Doug, but it was something that was sort of an interesting, and I thought underwritten part of the sort of NLS story was the journal. Because can you look at the NLS journal now? No, you can't. Or
yes, you can.
Oh, you can, right. Well,
on the original hardware, never. That's an important thing. He kept it going till the very end. I think it's still available, but it hasn't been ported. So your point is still very important.
So one of the interesting things that we're doing is just as a sort of meta activity here, almost without intending to. Well, that's to be unkind to Freud. He's made an awful lot of the running in terms of this, but it is the recording of what we're going along. It's fascinating to me because we are, even without intending, we are sort of. We're going back to this and recreating the journal. And part of the thing, I find myself thinking, okay, so what needs, what needs to be in the journal? How is it useful? And we've had these conversations, for instance, about things like the degree of needing transcript or the degree of fidelity. You know, how much effort is it actually worthwhile spending? Just saying, well, we can store everything doesn't necessarily help us find stuff. We just end up with more stuff. So that's just one point. At the very beginning of this conversation, you're talking about the conversation that I happened to sit in with you and Dave in our little small university group this morning, and about what the lab, as it were, could do. And I think acting as a gateway to a wider group or wider audience is a really useful thing, because Prader has a wonderful set of contacts and has spent, well, I don't know how many years you've done FAT now, I've lost count, but good few years. And so there's that backswell that also is sort of washing in beneath this. And I think that's really useful, because so one of the other things that we can do on top of the sort of more hands-on stuff in terms of demonstrating things is effectively having something, well, in flippant terms, a brand to push this out to people. And that's where actually the newsletter activity that Anthony talked about is another really useful thing. So it's an opportunity to help keep this to the fore. So it's not necessarily about what we're doing now, but what we've done or what we hope will be to come. And one other thing, because you were talking about, I'm reading the Cosciendo book at the moment, and he talks about Lombardy Prophy. So I pulled out this piece of paper to remind me, which I keep stapled up everywhere. Forget that it's about Matters Marshall, but it was basically these are the rules when you're writing operational papers for the service. Top 2, selection and maintenance of the aim. Number 2, maintenance and morale. Your biggest asset are the people. And that's something that it's always good to remind ourselves of. So if things go a bit wobbly from time to time, well, that's the nature of people. But the wonderful thing here, and in the diaspora around us of those who are close to and associated with future text, is this wonderful range of inputs. And just one other thing I'll see, on a more practical level, one of the things I've been sort of trying to think to do is where to pull together some of the pieces of the existing puzzle, Ray, VR as such, in terms of, in a sense, the known knowns, and without trying to turn it into a massive sort of library, but it's almost to say, well, here is a sort of rough, here is what we do or don't understand without being in, without deep technical terms, because that's the edge of the thing we're nibbling at, I think. And an area I'm sort of happy to try and help with, because it doesn't require any particularly specialist knowledge in computer terms, but it requires sort of attention to detail I'm quite happy to do. So anyway, as a thought.
Thanks, Mark. Peter? Are you muted still, Peter?
It's just a hand.
I think your camera's on.
The image is gone.
I think his camera's on and his laptop is shut.
Okay, well, while we're waiting for Peter to reappear. Oh, yeah.
Oops, sorry, I was on mute and I didn't even realize it.
Oh, okay.
Let's see. Oh, what happened to my picture there? That's weird. It took off my photo. That's very odd.
Is your camera on, perhaps, and your webcam is covered?
There we are. Much better. Thank you.
We can hear you.
Okay. So what I wanted to say was, I think maybe what we need is to have a research statement as opposed to a manifesto. Just a separate, discrete piece talking about the research side of the focus. As far as politics go, I think our strongest angle is arguing for interoperability of systems and exchange of data across VR worlds, and let applications for things like climate change be moved off to the periphery. Otherwise, it's not really playing to our strengths. We don't have any climate scientists in our group, and that has us dabbling in areas that we're visibly weak in. But we have a much stronger claim to the systems interoperability side, and the technical dimensions of it in terms of making sure that we don't get stuck in a siloed world where we can't merge models from Meta versus Apple systems, and we get forced having to pick one big tech player and bet on that. Consistently, when I pick one player's technology, it winds up getting shelved. I had so many, I was deeply into CyberDog and OpenDoc, and then poof, they went away on me. And they were always the best of breed technologies, and almost invariably they got sidelined because of corporate internal politics. So we don't want to get trapped in that. As far as taking ownership of things, I'd like to take ownership of the idea of trying to get a shared programming test bed so that we can start plugging our code together. And I'd like to take partial exception to Frode's notion that we shouldn't be providing any guidance to the programmers among us. I'd be actually delighted to have Frode come up with a description of, here's the kind of a widget that I wish I had. Is it feasible to do this? Something like that. And that would help give a little bit more direction to the coding experiments that I'm taking.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just writing in chat a little bit of a summary, but first of all, I have sold this to you guys again and again, right? The reason I'm highlighting it again today, I was reading yesterday a section on fish, and fish are much more interesting than I realized, but the strong relevance here is when you're in liquid, hearing and feeling, so touch and hearing is basically the same thing. And that to me is like 20 years into the future with VR, where through whatever means, we will have complete body immersion by not taking the brain out like Elon Musk wants to do, but by using all the stuff we have, right? So I really think that one of our jobs is to evangelize the power of VR and highlight the dangers of VR. And by dangers, I don't just mean social isolation and that stuff. I really mean opportunity cost of not investing in productivity. That's one thing. The other thing is exactly that, sharing data. That's politics and infrastructure. And then it is a matter of building stuff and finally talking about all kinds of issues. In other words, we have very separate things in here that relate. We don't have to choose one thing, right, guys? Over to you, Brandel.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with the sort of recognition that, you know, that the human sensorium is an essential thing to be able to kind of talk about and draw people's awareness toward. Yeah, I mean, one issue with using virtual reality at the time that it is such a buzzword is that it doesn't, you know, per se include as much holistic consideration of that sensorium as potentially using a term that is explicitly picked for that purpose. But also in terms of the climate change, one of the things that it occurred to me is that, you know, all of this work has been here and before has been motivated by other existential urgencies in the past, and not just Doug, but and not just Vannevar Bush actually, but also Oatley and LaFontaine, who are arguably, you know, very, very central future of text figures as well. Everybody knows Paul Oatley and LaFontaine, like the Mundanean people. Yeah. So just the simple fact of the complexity of the modern world and the difficulty in navigating it sort of necessitates the perspectives that are actually not just central to the sort of demands and concerns that we have, but also from a historical perspective, the most common sort of line of argument and reasoning through what future of text has been, not just from this year, not just from these past 10 years of your symposia, but also since the beginning of the concept that text could be more meaningfully technologically augmented in the way that the Mundaneum sought to do. So yeah, I think and you know, while climate change is an important existential risk, it is actually it's distinct from sort of some of the other informational existential risks that we sort of exist within today in terms of misinformation and the spread of those things. Like they're related, but they are but it's a distinct one. You know, we would have it even if we didn't have climate change, and so it may be helpful to actually broaden the field to those, just to say that those dire, and but they're neither of them are any less dire and existential than the other. They threaten the very like practicality and viability of the human project, and so being able to kind of talk in general about what it is about climate change and what it is about text that can be brought to bear against it may be a better mechanism for focusing what it is that the future of text does to a problem like that. Because you're quite right. We are not climate scientists, and to that end, like the climate part of the climate change question is not something that we have a great deal of force against. But what we do is information processing and communication.
Can I jump in on that and say two things? One will be a meta of the first thing, but fantastic point, and I'll clarify where I came from. I was writing about this maybe 2 days ago. My own thoughts on, you know, where I think future of text should focus and stuff like that. And I was surprised that in the writing, I started thinking about climate change, not as comparing VR to climate change. I misrepresented it a little bit there. What I actually stumbled on was, you know, we don't know much about climate change, but it's highly likely that we'll all start spending way more time in our homes. And that, say, for instance, because the weather will be so erratic, we'll rely more on a system of drones or people delivering things to us because it'll be so weird to go outside. And if that is the case, then it'll be even more important that our homes start to represent way more than they currently do. And in that case, I could see the timeline for VR adoption actually being much more soon than previously expected, because it's like VR is suddenly the only place where I can have an extra house in my house, you know, a house for working. And so that got me excited. I was like, yeah, this is inevitable. This path, if any of those statements have any truth to them, then the path to VR is certain, and not simply for games or for metaversing, right? So I can make this a core principle of mine. Now, a meta statement on that. So that was thing one. Thing two, and this absolutely should not be recorded, but whatever, it's going to be recorded, and I'll embrace it. This is a funny part about where we're at, I think, with language and technology. I was just required to do a self-assessment, performance review of myself at my job. And so I answered some things. And then I got angry at the questions, because they were asking of me to, in one moment in time where I am situated right now, to try and make statements about who I am as if I was like an entity in a whole graph. Like I could be that objective, right? So like, what are your short-term career aspirations and long-term career aspirations? I wound up saying, I'm a peacock, I gotta fly, which I know is gonna get me in trouble. But the point is that at that moment, in the orphaned way that these questions were given to me, there was no way I could provide a sufficient answer. You know, I could, in a conversation with someone, I could be much more honest and forthright, you know, but it's weird that we're put into these situations. That's what I wanted to stress. And it is part and parcel of, maybe it's impossible to get away from, but I think it applies even to the manifesto talk, is like, you know, we create in moments, and then and then what we create extends and blends into other contexts. And in some ways that's very unfair. And in some ways keeps me from even publishing, right? Because it's like, it's a funny experience to touch on later. So that's all I wanted to say.
Okay, my turn again. Two things. One of them, please, I will tweet today or tomorrow about Friday. Please tweet by yourself or retweet or something. We need some people there. But in terms of, I have further up here priorities, sharing data and all of that. We need to agree on a list. We put it on the website. Feel free to write them in here or blog about it or whatever, and we'll have it. It'll be useful. But the thing that really makes me so completely kind of irate, I've been very lucky in my life. I have wonderful parents. My father left a few years ago when he died. And I have also had, I come from a rich country, Norway. I live in the best country in the world, the United Kingdom. We have a health service here that is ridiculously impressive, et cetera. So I'm basically Mr. Privilege on every single level as far as what has externally been given onto me. One of the benefits of that is I've had some clarity of vision, many others have too, but I've had clarity of vision that has been removed from current realities. Like I haven't need to worry about losing this particular job and so on. And that meant that I've been going through several stages of, oh my God, this is going to happen. And it's always been correct. It's been mostly Doug-like, I'm only a small part of Doug's vision, but it's been that kind of stuff to save time so you guys don't have to listen to it. The big thing now is, and this is going to sound patronizing, it's purely for clarity because you all, I'm sure, agree. Imagine if we take our entire lives and we say, no, you're not allowed to live in a house in a box or an apartment, you have to live in an actual box. And we're going to cut a slit out and you're going to have a straw for food. That is all you're going to be able to do in the future. That is actually where we live now compared to VR. The current VR is awful. I had almost an hour meeting with Mark today. It was shit. This much view, and it was a bit heavy on my nose and all kinds of things. But it is comparing QuickTime, 320 by 240 being useful, 640 by 480. Can you believe it's possible? When we look at what all of us here, relatively mature people, have lived through, the fact that VR is going to unlock so many senses so soon, there's just no question. But in order to have the imagination of what that'll be, it's actual work. Like, somebody came into Doug's office and he said, Doug, the problem with you is, you're just a dreamer. And he said, well, dreaming is hard work. We in this group, we are doing that dreaming work. It's really, really important and it's really, really difficult. It has to be one of the things we do. So I therefore ask all of you, in order to set the world on fire, for everyone to realize that, holy moly, VR can offer, mature VR, like 1 or 2 years out, can offer up the most incredible mind space. I think that everything we do should be that. Whether that's doing demos, working on infrastructure, politics, whatever, it is to open up the extreme potential of VR. And by VR, I mean the whole gamut. I see Brandel is shaking his head like crazy. Do I have other head shakes or what's the feeling? What's the temperature of the room?
I'm excited, Mark. If you were in VR, I'd be eager to hear what you thought of not just your head but also your hands.
Well, Mark zoomed into the Horizons room. He was in Flatland.
Can I make? I'm sorry. Alan's waiting. Well, everyone's waiting. Briefly, yeah. So I was in 2D Flatland watching it, but I thought actually, funny enough, despite Fred's observation about its quality, I was actually pleasantly surprised in the sense it was a lot better than I thought it would be. The moment I enjoyed the most was when they turned round and by sheer dint of timing said, I think I've got a problem. And I was thinking, you sure have, you've got nothing from the waist down. And I was thinking, but why do I need to see that? And the thing that I really took away from that session was one thing that the designers have got really, I thought interestingly right is, well, the hand movements were very good, but also the facial gestures. So what I, as the 2D viewer, noticed was, as you would in a conversation, so my eyes went to the face. So the fact that the body stopped at the waistline was hidden by, well, it's hidden by the desk anyway. So there was no wasted effort there. And these are suitable and sensible and pragmatic elisions at this point of the technology stage. So I have to say, but bearing in mind I'm coming from behind, I didn't think it was a half bad experience, even though I wasn't actually, as it were, in the room.
Mark, you just wait till you get to the point where things in the world interfere with how you see this. It is a perception changer. It's just very strange, but thanks for those words. Mr. Peter, who we can't even see the face of normally, who we look forward to seeing as a avatar puppet in VR soon. Please go ahead.
I'd also like to note that some of what we need to build is really orthogonal to the fact that VR is offering a 3D experience. The key affordances of being able to lift something out of your laptop and put it into another environment, it doesn't really even matter that the other environment is a 3D environment. What matters is that we build the infrastructure to be able to extract something from one display context and move it to another context, or to receive manipulation commands from one environment across environments in another one. And that, again, it's completely orthogonal to the fact that one display is a 3D display. I also think we could probably do a lot of interesting things in 2D land with a 3D controller. I have that Space Mouse device, and if I could just get that to be talking to the JavaScript world, then I'd be able to be doing 3D manipulations, even though I'm only interacting through a 2D screen.
Peter, you got to try it. There's a lot we can do, absolutely. And there's no question that it'll be very useful to, you know, once we've made the future and everything's nice, to go sit in the park on your laptop and work on a flat screen and still have a 3D environment. Of course, that'll be useful, no question about it. But it's such a completely...
Basically, I'm sort of leaning to holding out for Apple's headset with prescription lenses snapped into it, so I don't have to worry about physical glass frames underneath the headset, and I have 8K on each eyeball as opposed to the current standards, assuming that those rumors are relatively likely to track out. I know that Brindle can't talk about it, but hopefully it's coming down the pike very soon.
Peter, I ordered prescription inserts today. I went to my opticians and had them fill in the form. So that's very interesting. I mean, all of this stuff is going to happen. You'll have lasers going into your eyes. You don't need a prescription. The lenses will fold automatically. All this amazing stuff will happen. But for us as pioneers and inventors, the fact that there are so many niggles is absolutely amazing. That's why we need to just feel this stuff. Mr. Henderson.
Yeah, I just reflecting again on the fact that, I mean, the more I listen to this, the more I'm so convinced that, you know, I think one area where we can definitely offer something that is needed and other people won't have the incentive necessarily to do, but will gain from, would be to be effectively begin to make the something akin to visual meta for VR, and whether that's moving in and out of augmented virtual space or between different spaces within virtual space, because I see no incentive, apart from someone who's got enough megalomania and money to want to capture the entire space. And hopefully no one will get that powerful because they'll put a big wall around it. But otherwise, you know, people will be making best effort to make something, and they're fine. But they will all, as these things do at any early stage, they'll all wander off in slightly different directions. And they will look rather, you know, they will feel rather similar, but they will not talk to one another at the level where we really need them to. And, you know, and this very much feels like a reprise of the middle of last year when we were banging our heads on visual meta and, well, can we get anything? And although what came out in that instance seems laughably simple, it's perfectly extensible. And but we have something that's there and in place and can be built off. And I think getting that sort of bedrock in place, because it's, you know, it's a kind of infrastructure that no one ever asks for. They just don't, it's just not sexy, but it's tremendously powerful and useful. And the great thing is there's an opportunity to do it now because there's no one to tell us not to.
Yes, Randall, please.
Something that has struck me about computing from the inside over the last 20 years, and I'm not sure if I brought it up. I think I might have brought it up here. Doesn't matter too much. Is that unlike the great schism in the church after Luther. That at least people noticed that, but in fact, in computing, there has been a schism done right down the middle of it since the very beginning. Between, I think that the best names for it, I called it AI and control theory, but it's data processing and control theory, and you know, Doug is firmly in the latter camp, I would argue, and VR as a sort of as a platform is the current sort of most radical manifestation of control theory. So by those terms, I mean, you know, data processing is where you do some non-interactive computing, mainframe computing style, run a job on some stuff and get some brilliant insight, but the mechanism through which it happens is more or less kind of closed from the start. Whereas control theory is where you do stuff and you're tightly integrated in the loop. Really, virtual reality, one of the reasons why I actually encourage people to seek other terms in virtual reality is because it sort of implies that virtual reality is good enough, or that it's sort of encompassing of all of the capabilities that like some the people who are talking about virtual reality are in agreement with you about it. Whereas I think, you know, terminology like spatial computing or embodied computing give a clearer sort of indication that there are a number of sort of faculties and capacities, like you're talking about the sort of the tactile sensorium, Frode. The fact that there's just a whole plethora of things that simply aren't on anybody's radar to really kind of address in any meaningful sense. And I think those are actually at least as important as virtual reality and the visual, like the spatial visual sort of models that they seek to kind of marry up with, because you know, frankly, from what I've seen of the industry, so many people believe that they'll simply be done once they'll have virtual reality, and that nothing could be further from the truth. We have this vast array of sensory modalities, capacities that are sort of both direct and kind of amalgams, synthesized from the combination of things. You know, the way that our thermoception and our tactile perception combine in order to give a higher level sense of wetness, which can be hacked and broken through various things by sort of picking the exact right pressures and temperatures to make it seem as though something is water, and the thermal conductivity and stuff like that. So like there's a lot more to do, and it's I think it would be valid, just in the same way, Frode, as you're aware that trying to pull people into the fold of what virtual reality affords. The same job needs to be done on the people who are zealots for virtual reality to realize that their job isn't done yet. Once they get that, they must do that, but they mustn't be finished after it. So yeah, that's one of the things that may also help, because it pulls it out of a buzzwordy sort of hype train kind of bandwagoning into something that is clearer, that it's fundamentally about what we get out of our senses and being people, and what we can do with computing. But yeah, that's
you are obviously dead right. That's exactly what needs to be done. And you know, I've ordered Jaron Lanier's book. Should be here. Should have been here today. Maybe tomorrow. I'm going to read like mad to make sure I'm not repeating anything. But we do need to, like the example that Alan just put in the chat. And also when you look at recent movies like Foundation, you know, where they have these hologram things, whether it's AR and VR in one sense is irrelevant. The point is that the environment can be whatever the heck you want it to be. And the amount of imagination, the amount of experience is absolutely insane to get to where we need to go. So when it was actual literal music to my ears what you said, because having been a text person for so long, all I've gotten is AI will do it, VR will do it. Excuse me, AR will do which bit? And just, huh? Right. So it has to be built. And, you know, that's part of the discussion Mark and I had earlier, where we're furiously fighting each other over the same point. Things in this space needs to be built, and we need to know why we want to build it and what the potential is. So yeah, we need to evangelize this. So the question then becomes, how do we do that? What are we going to do in terms of, I don't know which one of Jaron's book. I think it's called VR or something. So what are we going to do? I'm going to go through a list, and you guys are going to shake your head if you don't agree. This is stuff I think we've agreed on. Number one, we'll keep doing an annual symposium. It'll be more leaning in this world. Keep doing the book. We'll have a monthly journal that we're all going to figure out together what it means. I'll be the head of that. I'm very excited for any feedback, including articles in it. Similarly, Alan's going to do the newsletter under the same kind of a model. We are also going to build demos. Brandel and Adam should feel free to do that. And of course, as much or as little feedback as they want will happen. Maybe at some point we need to find money to code for other people to do what is more boring within that. We have to work on some sort of a visual meta for VR, because the insanity of not sharing information is scary. But we also need to basically write poetry, right? We need to get this, like Adam is so angry at Ready Player One. I think it's a fun little thing, but every reason to be angry. I mean, this little chapter I just read about fish in here, that's where it's really at, when you're properly immersed in an entirely new environment. But I'd really like to hear specifics from you guys, what you want to do. Yeah, Dawn of the New Everything, yes. Oh, the book-wise, yes, he's got a good title there. But also, on Friday, I don't know how many people will be there for Barbara, hope a few. It would be nice for me to do a 1-minute introduction of her, but I also want to do an introduction of us. It would be nice to point to our website and say, this is our community now, and we are kind of the core or steering or whatever you want to. What? No, Peter. Anyway, distracting me like mad here. But please have a look at the website. Please, if there's something you want me to add or remove, tell me. But also you can write your own stuff. It'd be really good if everybody writes a really brief bio. And I think that in addition to logging into Alan's Crafts, I think it would be good if we had a resource page. All we have now is VR resources, and most of them don't work. So specifically, Brandel, can you take a little time to add resources to the kind of VR things we can use in Oculus that you built?
Yeah.
Okay, that would be fantastic. Here's a specific question. So today, Mark was in a flat screen interacting with me and Horizons. But let's say that you, Brandel, have built a native Oculus thing and you send it all to us and we look at it. Is there a way to live cast that to someone else? Could, for instance, until Peter and Mark jumps ship, could they view it?
So live, I'm less certain of. I know that I can from phone. You can cast. You can cast from your Quest to your phone, like this. And so that I could do that. It might be possible to. So if it's Quest native, then you wouldn't be able to do it. But on a Windows machine, if anybody has those, I have a couple lying around. You can use a Quest as a VR, as an Oculus Rift, so that it's tethered and it's making use of your computer's graphics card, which is great because most people who do gaming have a fairly beefy graphics card these days, and so you can get a lot more out of it.
That's PC only, right?
That's correct at this point. Yeah, I mean, I'm not part of any discussions, but I would hope that given the power of Apple Silicon in particular, that it would be on that company's roadmap to make sure it happens. But I'm not aware of any specific plans. but yeah, so to that end, it would be a much easier task than to stream that to Zoom, because it's being generated on the machine, and then you'd have the ability to direct it off. That wouldn't work for anything that's native Quest, but I don't write anything that's native. I write everything in web. So it might be possible to grab that mirror and transmit it over Zoom. I'm not on my PC at the moment, but if I did that, then that would be possible. Otherwise, it might be possible, I mean, again, in web, to build a virtual participant similar to the Flatland participant that Mark was able to occupy within Horizon. But that would need to be a consideration in the architecting of that system, but not a particularly difficult one beyond getting multiple participants in the first place. Once you do that, you just say, well, this one's just 2D. So yeah, I'm not aware of anything out of the box other than being able to. So it requires no coding, no particular interventions to do the screencast stuff.
Yeah.
It's just gross. But yeah, beyond that, I'm not aware of any other solutions that are available.
So yeah, that's interesting. I see your hand, Mark, but I just want to say on the website, I posted on the recent posts graphics of the future. That's NVIDIA's presentation. And yes, it's all graphically nice and everything, but to see, what is it, scene description language or something like that? To see some of the formats that are being used.
USD. Universal Scene Description. Yes, that's what Apple touts for augmented reality quick look, and what Apple is promoting very strongly for the model tag, the HTML model element that I mentioned in the past.
Okay, so this is important. So
will that display on M1 Max even if you don't have a VR headset?
USD?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, it's built into Finder right now. So if you download a USD file, for example, the ones on the Apple developer website of the tin soldier and all that kind of junk, then you press space, they open up in quick look and preview. And if you have Xcode, then it'll open it up in Xcode, and you can kind of manipulate, modify it. There at least was in the past an application called Reality Converter that allowed you to sort of pick it open and export it to other formats. But yeah, it's very much a format that Apple is committed to for the representation and transmission of 3D data.
could you please post that on the website?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the publicly available resources from Pixar and Apple on model and on AR Quick Look and stuff like that, I'm happy to do that. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. I'm just going to do a thing here. Resources, links, etc. Okay, so now I've just on our blog. WordPress thing, whatever. We have one thing that called resources in brackets, links, books, etc. That's where you probably want to do most of this. But we also have one called VR resources brackets to view in VR. So if we can start populating some of that stuff, that'd be really, really useful, especially to view in VR. Okay, that's
typing is a pain.
So then I have to ask the question of such models. Are the descriptions very verbose, or do you think they could be hidden inside Visual Meta for smaller models?
Models are, if you're talking about things like model geometry, unfortunately, model geometry is incredibly verbose. You run megabytes and megabytes describing the 3D position of all of the vertices within a given 3D shape. And there are plain text formats representations. So the USD, as it's defined by Pixar at this point, has two variants: USD ASCII and USD Crate, USD A and USD C. And ASCII has the ability to provide more basic terse descriptions of primitives like spheres and cones and circles. But for the most part, people tend to be describing geometry. I mean, that's also because the center of mass of work, particularly in public, that has been done with USD has been by Pixar, and Pixar is in the business of moving billions of triangles around for the purpose of entertaining your children and developing the next great, toy franchise system. So their sort of point of view on what USD is for is heavily biased towards those. That said, there's nothing to preclude USD being used primarily for its kind of informational relations, and in fact, it's a sort of a multi-file format in the sense that you can create directories that nest into each other for relations to each other, and there's a concept of a USD prim or primitive that you can put all sorts of information on. It's sort of mandatory that it carries forward and respects any additional data that it sees but doesn't recognize in any given viewer. And that's because from within Pixar, where it was made, they have a number of different applications that do a number of different things. And just because one doesn't use X doesn't mean it's allowed to strip that data out. So it's amenable to a lot of the sort of the broad stroke format questions and concerns that people have, in a way that's much greater than the GL transmission format, GLTF, which is the sort of the current format of choice for throwing 3D models around on the internet right now. So if you look at Sketchfab, for example, you can pull down and all of the VR previews that you'll see in Quest are facilitated through GLTF. GLTF is very much considered to be a last mile format, something which is the end of the line for a piece of information, such that if you really cared about it, you would be retaining a separate kind of representation of it for the benefit of being able to do your HD remasters or what have you. So yeah, USD is very valuable. Right now, nobody is considering it from the perspective of informational provenance or relations because of the work that people are doing. And to the extent that I would comment on Apple as a company, because people work there on graphics and technology, they consider it in terms of that graphical technology and vertices and shaders and stuff like that, rather than informational content and context that we think is probably more important. But I would say that it's probably amenable to it. So very much worth looking at how concepts like visual meta can be brought to bear against what's already present within USD as well.
That is really interesting. And I see there are many hands up, but I have to ask this question. When you're in, let's say, VR workrooms, just to take an example, you have your monitor there. Can you imagine a way where you touch something on your screen and then something on the screen, there's some kind of a hook that data now becomes accessible in the room? Is that a complete pipe dream, or is that something that can be worked towards?
Do you mean where you can pull a model out of a page and then it becomes some artifact distinct from a page?
Yes.
So, I mean, in a web browser, if you click, unless people have done nefarious things, which for the most part do, unfortunately, at this point, if you click and drag on a picture within a page, it drags out and you can put it onto your desktop in the 2D sort of parlance. Is that the sort of essentially the equivalent functionality you're imagining?
Yes, but into the VR 3D space.
That's not a capability in Oculus. It's a sort of a basic tenet of web usability that I would expect most people would aim to include within their systems. It's certainly not something that should be impossible. I mean, generally speaking, people will break that on the web if they feel like it. In the same way that when Facebook writes advertisement in the feed, it's actually discontinuous letters so that you can't find it, and use that as a basis to hide that component of the page. People will ruin your experience, but generally speaking, I think the expectation would be that, yeah, you should be able to pull models out and take them where you want.
So currently, the way it works is you send me a URL, I go on the web browser in Oculus, and I get a normal thing, and then it says view in VR. I click that button and it goes out. But that is only something that can be done from there to there. I can't do that into, let's say, Horizons Workroom or Immersed or anything like that. And that is, of course, part of the goal we want for the future, right?
Right. Yeah. So that's that. I've said in the past, and I'm sure other people are aware and agree that that software is bureaucracy sped up, and bureaucracy always encompasses and is a crystallization of a value system. So to the end that if it's simply not part of somebody's value system, then it's not going to be preserved as a capability. Within the context of web, that's a little bit more open-ended, and the sort of the values of the web are much more sort of radically inclusive and considerate than anything that a specific vendor will create. Like if we're not talking about you, but we're talking about Facebook and applications and commitments to things like drag and drop. And the preservation of artifacts that might be present within spatial documents and stuff like that. Yeah, so there's no particular reason to expect that would be a mandatory part of any third-party application. That people have, the ability to determine sort of the response from whatever user actions and infer various intents for better or worse. So there's very little that anybody could do in that context. In the same way that people will also be able to ruin web, they can ruin their own native apps by default. But I would hope that same defaults will prevail within the web context as it moves into space as well.
Thanks, Brandel. Hi, Keith. Okay, Mark.
Listening to Brandon, I was thinking, I was sort of, when you were describing the two forms of USD, I was thinking, so is this a bit like saying that, well, you could, if you really knew PostScript well, you could read it and read it as text, but that's not many humans on the planet, if any, whereas we have other forms. So that's really interesting to see, because I think one of the things, and I'm sort of happy to help put a shoulder to, is to try and put a circle around maybe the number of formats, which hopefully are far fewer, because I can't remember if it was Alan or Peter kindly posted that paper from 2015 about someone who said, well, here we are, these are the 72 graphic formats we found, or sorry, it might have been you, Brandon, I don't know. And I thought, yeah, well, that's sort of something we might usefully do in this space of, it's a place where other people are looking, because as you rightly said, that's not where people's focus is now. They're just building stuff, to make nice movies or make better experience. They're not necessarily thinking about who owns what or where it goes. And just what my hands up actually for something earlier, just saying when Freya went through this list of things, I just drawing some threads together as saying, and just us keeping an eye on when we're talking about sort of demos, in the sense of within demos, what things that we might actually be doing in the demo. So there's, in a sense, there's the manifestation of the demo that makes something that it's what you see in the demo, I guess is another way of putting it. So, it is no small amount of work often to make the demo in any way, shape or form. But there's an also interesting question that having got to the top of that mountain, what do I actually see? What's the view I see? What are we doing inside this thing we've created? And that's something I think we're collectively between us, we could help hone that, because I don't know, my sense is that sometimes I've often found it's much easier to implement somebody else's spec, because I don't have to worry about the constraints. If the constraints in some way stop me doing one, I can go back and say, look, I can't do that, or I need more flex. But otherwise, I just don't have to worry about those things. All I have to know, is I need to make one of these at the end. And that can be perhaps helpful as well as useful in terms of, what we want to do at the very sort of demo end of things. Peter.
Okay, one of the points that was raised in the cyberspace first steps book was the notion of having cyber decks that would be able to view the models and having different levels of hardware looking at the same model. So if you were on a really low fidelity device, you could just simply pull in again, maybe just a textual representation of the 3D scene for someone who's only working on an old style BlackBerry connected to the net. Whereas if you were in a holographic suite somewhere, you might actually be able to walk around with goggles, free, full immersive VR, and that would be a function of your local processing power independent of the model. And I think as we move forward, we want to get away from detailed descriptions of the models themselves and abstract out the description of what kinds of objects we want and how they relate to each other, so that our description of a scene, we really don't care necessarily about the shader on the back cushion of the chair. What we want as an end user would be to say, okay, there's a Victorian chair in the back left corner of the room. and then let the system decide how it's going to represent that. So we have to get away from the notion of everybody seeing the exact same representation of the object and move more to the object and the abstract. And that would let us have very compact visual meta representations of things. Because again, your visual meta might just say Victorian chair, and then your CyberDeck would decide how it's going to represent that in whatever environment you're currently working in. We could put the actual geometry in the interplanetary file system based upon content hashes, and then the visual meta would be very compact because we don't want all that raw data in the visual meta. A system could go and retrieve that. All that the visual meta really needs to have is the core notion of what kind of an entity is and the relationship among the entities, and then push off all the work and how to render that to some client application that we don't need to care about.
Yeah, so in terms of the ability to represent something as canonically this particular chair and then seek alternate representations based on what deck, so to speak, that people are kind of running it on, that's also something that's sort of a responsibility that I would say USD is dimly aware of in the form of what are called USD variants, having the ability to say, under some circumstance, you can use this, and under some other circumstance, you can do that. Again, though, because it's been sort of birthed from the center of Pixar's data flow formats, the mechanism through which they are considering what kind of determinations might give rise to this being the choice versus that are relatively coarsely defined, in contrast to, if you're familiar with web, we have things like CSS media queries, and people do various breakages on detecting aspects of the user agent. So those are sort of at some level actually distinct from the system for doing the choosing is distinct from what the contents of those choices are, whereas in USD, because they've had total control in a context of total trust over those things, those constraints aren't, those considerations aren't as well thought out within the context of, like, what is it safe to choose, where is it safe to choose it from, that are absolutely necessary considerations at every level, at every moment within the web, because it's simply such an untrustable computing and executional context. So there will be a number of additional concerns that need to be brought to bear against it as people become more aware of how valuable it is to be able to pull these model files down, these USDs and other things. And yeah, so to the extent you mentioned the IPFS, right now, one expectation is that model variants would only be loadable from a subdomain of the location that the root asset is at. And that's just because you can't trust things on the internet. And hopefully you can trust things under the directory you host your file at. And if you can't, then yeah, that's very sad for you, and we shouldn't trust you at all. Yeah, so those things are part of those considerations. There will need to be additional thinking and additional constraints put on it as a consequence of how dangerous the internet is.
I suppose we can trust things that have a content hash on them, though. So it shouldn't really matter what domain it's loading from, as long as the hash agrees with the hash that you're looking to find.
That's not always true. I mean, the fact is that RSAs have been broken. People have managed to create collisions. Cryptography is but one tool amongst others as a mechanism for determining truth and trust. So theoretically, I wouldn't trust it.
So this is obviously a really core and important discussion, but also an ongoing discussion. Definitely something I'm super passionate about. I see Alan has his hand up.
Yes, a couple of topics. One, and I'm just throwing this in Craft, is perhaps another demo prompt, which is a section I'm creating. I have possibly a bad habit of whenever there's an article that I want to read, and it applies to email as well, I immediately send it over to some reading service like Instapaper or Matter. And that is where I've become used to processing a thing. And it's almost as if these days I can't read anything. And this applies 1000% at work. Emails come through and threads come through, and I'm just copying and pasting it. So I know that I can read it in whatever else, right? Because I can't process it unless I sort of own it, you know? And know that there's a version there. And I'll sometimes link back to the actual Gmail thread, the source of truth. But that makes me wonder about, oh, hello. It makes me wonder about that. What does that look like in VR? What and separate from the VR, putting that aside for a moment, the fact that that has become a normal behavior that we all have is really interesting in its own right. It's as if it's a new technology that we don't have a word or term for yet, but it's definitely something that I think I'm not alone to say. It feels nice to take X article, put it in your station, and tinker with it. And I pinpoint or frame it that way to say, like, I think that's different than personal knowledge management than Obsidian and Roam. I think that those swallow that portion, but it's a different thing. So I wanted to bring that up. And then also at some point, just getting to the tactical brass knuckle stuff, I love to either use Craft, Obsidian, or some place where we can do async work and dump this stuff. I think is critical, and I think we should talk about that. The channel link, the 4 varieties of channels that the one teacher came up with when working with students remotely, I think is a really good start and explanation of the value of async workshop assignments, etc. And then with that, I think that there should be some rules that go along with it, right? Like not to call you out a little bit, Frode, but like wherever we wind up doing our workstation, when something's posted, it should stay there, right? Whatever it's called. So if we start with like, innocuous locations and names, whatever, just knowing that, hey, it's going to be there. It may become curated, pushed down and pushed out, and that'll be something different. But once we share something with each other, it should like stay in that rough location. You're
referring to the discussion over the weekend. That was taken down for political reasons, but it's being re-edited. But I take your point completely. Completely. And so
this is the journal essentially, isn't it? I mean,
it should be the journal, and we're kind of having a little bit of a reset on that. But first of all, it would be really nice, Alan, if you could share that Craft access to us again. And also in terms of the journal, a lot of our chat here is internal chit chat and random things, but there's been a few things that Brandel has talked about towards the end, one of them on kind of document formats. That's really valuable to real people. So that's why I'm so happy to take the transcripts entirely into the journal. I don't expect people to read them through unless they have absolutely no life, but it should make things findable from there.
Yeah.
and also the issue that you said, Alan, earlier on today, how can you expect...
We have a new member, by the way. We need to say hi. Walia?
We've been typing hi in the chat. Sorry. Yes.
Oh, hi, everybody. Hello. Hello. Is that
Hi.
here? Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks for
is
joining.
that here? Let me just go where there's light so that you can see my face. Oh.
Where are you
Oh.
in the world?
Can you see me now?
We can see you.
Yes.
Yeah.
In Lagos?
I'm fine.
Oh, but we can't hear you very well now. Where are you?
Thank you. Yeah.
Oh.
I am privileged to be here. I just burst in by accident. I was reading the email that was sent to Nigeria.
Oh, really?
Oh, wonderful.
Hello.
Hey. That's fantastic. I hope I hope you can hear us. I didn't want to interrupt you, Frode, midway, but I just wanted to say hello and I'd love to hear more about you.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad that Wally is here. He's in our book as well, of course. And yeah, no, all I wanted to say is, you know, it's so strange. Once you get into any kind of a interest group, people of that interest group tend to be a bit obsessive. You know, just look at Keith and typography. He will know every detail about every font in the whole world, which is great. But also not in the kind of future of text community, there is this reverence of text, as we should have. But also, I think we have to accept that most text we just don't have time to read. So your comment earlier, Alan, is really, really crucial. And I think that at least part of what we try to build should be a way to get rid of text, so that we can have really good collaboration between us, really good ways to put useful text together, but not just to keep making bigger text mountains.
Agreed.
I would say that one of my goals is not necessarily less text, but also more ownership over text in terms of what we get to do to manipulate it to main things. You know, one of the things that is problematic for me with the overflow of tabs, which is actually a relatively recent phenomenon for me, I've got to say, is that there are, if these were all paper documents, I'd have the ability to arrange them in stacks and piles, and they'd be able to kind of dominate my perceptual field, my sensorium is my word of the day, in various ways for various reasons. So if I had a whole stack of things that related to each other, then I could put them together and compact them next to me. Whereas when I have a browser with tabs, they're arrangeable in that one-dimensional space, but I'm not allowed to, and to some extent I'm allowed to pin and scale those representations in order to have iconified versions of it on the left and stuff like that. But it's an incredibly poor cousin of the kind of spatial relating that I have the ability to do with real artifacts within the real space that I get to own. You know, and that I get to own part of it is just as important, because, you know, there are various things that people have done in Finder and File Explorer and Microsoft and Apple that have taken away or given various kind of relational capabilities. You have the ability to move icons around, and at other places, and at other times you don't. And sometimes those things are allowed to have semantic significance, and other times they aren't. Sometimes they're remembered, and sometimes they're not. And I think you know, one of the things that's important for us to be able to do is recognize the totality of the semantic significance that people will be able to imbue things with as a consequence of preserving, honoring, and transmitting the relational and organizational kind of priorities that are specified through those things. And again, not something that I have a great deal of confidence in the current generation of virtual reality and spatial computing sort of developers and researchers to recognize the significance of. And I would hope that people involved in the future of text have the ability to kind of convey just how much is important about all of the other aspects of information to those people, so that they know that it's not just about polygon count and shader model.
Indeed. Oh, Alan's got his hand up.
Oh, no, sorry, that was a legacy hand.
Oh.
I'll drop it.
Just quickly, for Alan, I'm by dint of pressing the right drop down, I am now seeing the craft stuff. So I'm definitely in. I've managed to claw my way in. The mistake I made, so I did all the onboarding stuff. I got the app. What I didn't realize is when I logged in, it had my name at the top, and I basically had to click a drop down and go into effectively the shared space. But it's all showing now.
Okay, great. What you'll see in there is just a real garbage fire of my thoughts at any given time. Please don't read any of it, you know, maybe, but it's open there if you do wind up reading it. I won't defend any of it, because a lot of it, they're not even complete sentences.
Your garbage file looks much neater than mine, so don't worry.
How can I subscribe to it, so to speak, in the app? Is there a link, or is it only on the webpage, or how does that
Yeah,
work?
if you are in Craft, apparently you have to go to the top right sidebar and pick the drop down, and you should see Future of Text Labs as an option. And it's the kind of thing where at least I've just been putting my thoughts over the course of the days or during meetings, and I'm happy to, do another format, specifically one that isn't Mac only. But just having a place that's sort of open and can hold thoughts as they come up and be organized passively, like books mentioned, VR formats, etc., I think is going to be essential to moving forward. Personally, this is where, even though it seems like a small deal to just log into WordPress and find an area, I find that an unfocused workstation is far more useful to just capture information.
I can't log in, Alan. I can't see it.
Do you have a Craft account?
Yeah, frode@hegland.com.
So top left.
I think I sent it to Liquidizer.
Oh, yeah, please.
Here, I'll send it to you.
Thank you.
When you're logged in, you'll see probably your name top left next to the three, open, minimize, close buttons.
On
Sorry.
the Mac, it's top right.
Oh, on my Mac, it's top left. I'm using the native client.
I'm using the native client, so there.
Ooh, well, here, I will send you a screen grab of what I mean.
My screen grab is better than yours.
Very good. I've got to jump though. Maybe next time we can walk through some of this. But great conversation.
Yeah, we're getting there.
Leah still around? I'd love to hear more about.
He's back.
Maybe next time I'd love an introduction or get to know you a little bit more. Unfortunately, I have to go.
Yeah, we're close to the top of the hour or bottom of the hour, depending on how you look at it. Look forward to seeing as many as possible on Friday. And then we will, please comment on what's on the front page of the site. Please post whatever you want. And
Freud, I stuck up a screen grab of my clearly different and inferior Craft Clients UI. But I because when it opened up, it had my name, and when I clicked that drop down, I saw the magic stuff.
there it is. Yeah, it was yeah. Oh, awesome, very good.
What you meant was it was the other right, was it not?
Alan said left. No, Alan said right. This is on the left. You see, you did the same thing. Anyway, see you later, guys. Peter, any last things? And then Keith, any first things before you go? We haven't heard a single word from you.
That's because I've been on mute. Apologies for dropping in late. Sorry, I got distracted writing, which is not a bad thing to be distracted by.
No, it's not. Are you also joining us on Friday for Barbara?
I will be, yeah.
Yeah, please do tweet and tell people to come. It should be interesting to have a medium-sized group. All right, thanks for today. And Walia, glad you're here. It's good to have
a great week, guys.
Perspectives.
Thank
And
you.
Have a great
bye,
week.
everyone. Bye.
Bye.